The moment Don Rafael Santini saw Ariana Greco crossing the marble floor of his estate with cleaning supplies in her trembling hands, something ancient and irreversible shifted in his chest. She didn't belong in his world of blood and power, yet here she was, eyes downcast, movements careful, devastatingly beautiful in her simple uniform. He'd built an empire on control, but watching her dust the mantle with delicate fingers, he realized control had just become an illusion. She was already his. She just didn't know it yet. If you're ready for a story of obsession, sacrifice, and a love that defies every rule, please like, share, and subscribe. Ariana had taken the job out of desperation, nothing more. The Santini estate paid 3 times what any other position offered, and her mother's medical bills were drowning her. She'd heard the rumors about the man who owned this fortress of white stone and iron gates, but rumors didn't pay for chemotherapy. She kept her head down during that first week, learning the routines from the head housekeeper, a stern woman named Lucia who gave one crucial instruction. Don Rafael values privacy above all else. You clean, you leave, you forget what you see. Ariana nodded. She had no interest in the mafia or the dangerous men who inhabited this world. But Rafael had every interest in her. He watched from the shadows of his study as she worked, moving through rooms with an efficiency that spoke of necessity rather than ambition. She never touched anything beyond her duties, never lingered, never showed curiosity about the wealth surrounding her. It fascinated him. Most people in his presence either cowered or schemed. She simply existed, as though his power meant nothing. It drove him mad. Who is she? Rafael asked Luca, his second in command, during a meeting 3 days after Ariana's arrival. Luca barely glanced up from the documents spread across the desk. Who? The new maid. Dark hair, works mornings. Ariana Greco. 24. Mother has stage 3 cancer. Father died 2 years ago. No criminal record, no debts beyond medical bills. Clean. Rafael's jaw tightened. I didn't ask for a background check. You didn't have to. Luca's smile was knowing. You never ask about the staff. Rafael said nothing, returning his attention to the contracts before him, but the words on the page blurred. His mind was elsewhere, tracking the soft footsteps he could hear in the hallway beyond. That afternoon, Ariana was cleaning the library when she felt eyes on her. She turned, finding Don Rafael standing in the doorway, perfectly still, perfectly silent. He wore a black suit that made him look like darkness given form, and his eyes, cold, calculating gray, studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Sir. She lowered her gaze immediately, heart pounding. You're efficient, he said, his voice low and measured. Thank you, sir. Look at me when I speak to you. It wasn't a request. Ariana forced herself to meet his eyes, fighting the instinct to flee. Up close, he was even more intimidating, sharp features, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile, and a presence that filled the entire room. What's your name? Ariana Greco, sir. How long have you been here, Ariana? 5 days. He stepped closer, and she held her ground despite every nerve screaming at her to back away. He stopped just close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive, subtle, devastating. Do you know who I am? Yes, sir. Does that frighten you? She hesitated. Lying seemed dangerous, but so did the truth. Yes. Something flickered in his eyes, approval, maybe, or satisfaction. Good. Fear keeps people alive in my world. He turned to leave, then paused. Your mother. Stage 3. St. Catherine's Hospital. Ariana's blood went cold. How do you? I know everything that happens under my roof. He glanced back at her. She'll have the best oncologist in the country by Monday. Consider it a benefit of your employment. He left before she could respond, before she could process the gift that had just been laid at her feet with the casual indifference of a man for whom miracles were currency. Ariana sank into the nearest chair, hands shaking. That weekend, she visited her mother and found a new doctor already consulting, running tests, discussing treatment options that had previously been financially impossible. Her mother wept with relief. Ariana wept with confusion. She didn't understand why Don Rafael Santini would help her. Men like him didn't do favors without expecting something in return, and the thought of what he might want terrified her. Monday morning, she arrived early, determined to thank him properly despite her fear. She found him in the dining room, reading a newspaper over black coffee, looking less like a crime lord and more like some dark prince from a fairy tale. Sir, I wanted to thank you. It's nothing. He didn't look up from the paper. It's everything. My mother needs treatment. Now she'll get it. His eyes lifted, pinning her in place. That's the end of the discussion. But it wasn't, and they both knew it. This was the beginning of something neither could name yet, something that hummed in the air between them like electricity before a storm. Days passed. Ariana worked and Raphael watched. He told himself it was simply caution, making sure his generosity wasn't being abused. But even he couldn't believe that lie. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. He was obsessed. He memorized her routines. Morning shift, 7 to 3. She always brought lunch from home, ate alone in the staff room, called her mother during her break. She was kind to the other staff, but kept professional distance. She never asked questions, never gossiped, never overstepped. She was perfect, and she was completely unaware of the effect she had on him. 2 weeks after their library encounter, Raphael found himself manufacturing reasons to cross her path. A question about the cleaning schedule. A request for coffee brought to his study. Small things that gave him proximity to her presence without revealing the depths of his fascination. Ariana noticed, though she didn't understand. Don Raphael was always polite, always professional, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made her skin prickle with awareness. Like she was a problem he was trying to solve, or a possession he was considering acquiring. It should have terrified her more than it did. One evening, she stayed late to finish organizing the West Wing library. Most of the staff had left, and the estate felt hollow, echoing with her solitary footsteps. She was on a ladder, reaching for a high shelf, when she felt hands grip her waist, steadying her. Careful! Raphael's voice, directly behind her, sent a jolt through her system. She looked down to find him holding the ladder, looking up at her with those unreadable gray eyes. I didn't hear you come in, she managed, pulse racing. I didn't want to startle you. But his hands remained on her waist, warm through the fabric of her uniform, possessive in a way that had nothing to do with safety. Ariana climbed down carefully, hyper-aware of his proximity. When she reached the ground and turned, he was still there, still touching her, still watching her with that intensity that made her feel stripped bare. You should go home, he said quietly. It's late. I just need to finish. It can wait. His thumb brushed against her side, a movement so small it might have been accidental. Except nothing about Raphael Santini was accidental. I'll have Marco drive you. That's not necessary. It is. His voice hardened slightly. You don't take the bus home alone after dark. Not anymore. It wasn't a suggestion. Ariana nodded, trapped between gratitude and unease at his knowledge of her habits, his casual assumption of authority over her safety. Marco drove her home in silence, and when Ariana climbed the stairs to her small apartment, she felt the weight of Raphael's attention like a physical thing, still clinging to her skin. She should quit. The thought came to her as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. Whatever was happening between her and Don Raphael Santini was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with his reputation. But her mother's treatments were working. The new doctor was a miracle worker, and for the first time in months, there was hope. Ariana couldn't leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The next morning, she arrived to find a black dress box waiting in her locker with a simple note. For the charity gala Friday. You'll attend as my guest. R. Her hands trembled as she opened the box. Inside was the most beautiful gown she'd ever seen. Midnight blue silk that would fit her perfectly, because of course he knew her size, knew everything about her. Lucia found her staring at it. Don Raphael doesn't extend invitations lightly. I can't accept this. You can't refuse. The older woman's expression was sympathetic. Not him. Not when he's decided something. What has he decided? Lucia just shook her head and walked away, leaving Ariana alone with a dress that cost more than 6 months of her salary, and a terror that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the part of her that wanted to wear it, wanted to stand beside him, wanted to know what it felt like to be chosen by a man like Raphael Santini. She was so screwed. Friday arrived too quickly. Ariana had tried twice to speak to Raphael, to explain that she couldn't attend, that it was inappropriate, that people would talk. Both times, he'd simply looked at her with those cool gray eyes and said, Wear the dress, Ariana. I'll collect you at 7. So at 7, she stood in her apartment in midnight blue silk, feeling like an imposter, when the knock came. Raphael stood in her doorway in a tuxedo that made him look like sin incarnated, and the way his eyes darkened as they traveled over her made her feel like she was standing before him naked. Beautiful, he said simply, offering his arm. The gala was held at the most exclusive hotel in the city, filled with politicians, businessmen, and the kind of people who shaped the world from shadows. Ariana felt their eyes on her as she entered on Raphael's arm, felt their curiosity and speculation. Raphael felt only satisfaction. Let them look. Let them wonder. Let them know she was his. He kept her close throughout the evening, his hand possessive at the small of her back, introducing her simply as Ariana, with no explanation, no justification. His touch burned through the silk, a constant reminder of his presence. She tried to maintain distance, to remember this was just an event, but Raphael made that impossible. He anticipated her needs before she voiced them. A glass of water when she looked overwhelmed, a quiet corner when the crowd grew too thick, his jacket when she shivered in the night air on the balcony. "Why am I here?" she finally asked, looking up at him against the backdrop of city lights. "Because I wanted you here." That's not an answer. His hand came up, fingers brushing her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. "It's the only answer that matters. Don Raphael. Raphael. Just Raphael when we're alone. We're not alone. There are 300 people inside." His smile was slight but genuine. "Right now, there's only you." Ariana's breath caught. This was dangerous. This was insane. This was a man who controlled an empire built on violence and fear, and he was looking at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. "I don't understand what you want from me," she whispered. "Everything." The word was simple, devastating. "I want everything, Ariana." Before she could respond, a voice interrupted. "Raphael, there you are. And who is this lovely creature?" The man who approached was handsome in a polished way, his smile too wide, his eyes too calculating as they swept over Ariana. Raphael's expression went cold. "Matteo, I didn't realize you'd be here." Last-minute invitation from the senator. Matteo extended his hand to Ariana, ignoring Raphael's barely concealed hostility. "Matteo Vitali. And you are?" "Leaving," Raphael said before Ariana could answer, his hand tightening on her waist. "Excuse us." He guided her away with a firmness that bordered on possessive, and Ariana felt the tension radiating from him like heat. Who is that? No one who matters. But his jaw was tight, his movements controlled in a way that suggested he was restraining something volatile. They left the gala shortly after, Raphael silent and brooding in the back of the car. When they reached her apartment, he walked her to her door despite her protests. "Raphael, I'm fine." He crowded her against the door, one hand braced beside her head, his body a wall of heat and tension. "Matteo Vitali is a snake who's been trying to undermine my operations for months. He looked at you like you were an opportunity, and I wanted to break every bone in his hand for touching you." Ariana's heart hammered. "You can't. I can do whatever I want." His other hand came up, cupping her face, thumb brushing her lower lip. "But I won't. Not because I can't, but because you wouldn't want me to. And what you want matters to me more than it should." "Why?" The question came out barely audible. "Because you're mine." His voice was rough, raw with an honesty that stripped away every defense she'd tried to build. "You've been mine since the moment you walked into my home. I just haven't figured out how to make you understand that yet." He kissed her then, and it wasn't gentle. It was possession and promise and obsession wrapped into one devastating moment that rewrote every certainty she'd had about her life. When he pulled back, Ariana was trembling. "This is insane." "Yes. You're a dangerous man." "Yes. I should run." His smile was dark. "You won't." He was right. God help her, he was right. Raphael left her there, and Ariana stumbled into her apartment, pressing her fingers to her lips, still feeling the imprint of his kiss, still drowning in the certainty that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to comprehend. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did Raphael, who sat in his study, staring at security footage of Matteo Vitali's arrival at the gala, cataloging every moment the man had looked at Ariana, every smile he'd offered, every word he'd spoken. Luca found him there at 3 in the morning. "You need to let this go." He touched her. He shook her hand. He looked at her like she was available. Raphael's voice was deadly quiet. "She's not. She's your maid, Raphael. This obsession is none of your concern." Raphael's eyes lifted, and Luca saw something there he'd never seen before. Genuine emotion, raw and uncontrolled. "I'm going to marry her. You've known her 3 weeks. I knew the moment I saw her." Raphael stood, straightening his cuffs with deliberate calm. "Make sure Matteo understands that Ariana Greco is under my personal protection. Anyone who approaches her answers to me." "Raphael, that's an order, not a discussion." Luca left, and Raphael returned to the footage, watching Ariana smile at something someone said, watching her tuck hair behind her ear, watching her exist in his world like she'd been made for it. She had no idea what was coming. No idea how thoroughly he planned to claim her, protect her, possess her. But she would learn. Monday morning, Ariana arrived at the estate to find she'd been reassigned. No more cleaning duties. Instead, Lucia informed her she was now Raphael's personal assistant, working directly with him in his study. I don't have any experience. Don Raphael doesn't care about experience. He wants you close. Lucia's expression was knowing. And what Don Raphael wants, he gets. Ariana wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but her mother's treatments flashed through her mind, and the memory of Raphael's kiss still burned on her lips. She was trapped, and the worst part was the growing suspicion that she didn't want to escape. Her first day as Raphael's assistant was a masterclass in controlled chaos. He ran his empire with precision, moving between legitimate business and darker dealings with seamless efficiency. Ariana took notes, scheduled meetings, and tried to ignore the way his eyes tracked her every movement. During a break, she finally confronted him. "Why am I really here?" Raphael looked up from his paperwork, expression unreadable. "You're intelligent, organized, and trustworthy. Those are rare qualities. You didn't need an assistant before. I didn't want one before." He stood, rounding the desk with predatory grace. "Now I do, because you want me close." "Yes." His honesty was devastating. Ariana crossed her arms, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "This isn't appropriate. Nothing about what I feel for you is appropriate." He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I'm a man who's built an empire on fear and violence, and you make me want to be something different. Someone worthy of the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention." "I don't." "You do." His hand came up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with devastating gentleness. "You look at me like I'm a man, not a monster. And I'm selfish enough to want to keep that, to keep you, consequences be damned." Ariana's resolve crumbled. "Raphael, this is too much, too fast. Then tell me to stop." His thumb brushed her cheek. "Tell me you feel nothing, and I'll step back. I'll keep you safe from a distance. I'll let you go." She opened her mouth, the words ready, the lie prepared. But nothing came out. Because she couldn't lie, couldn't pretend that his presence didn't consume her thoughts, that his touch didn't set her on fire, that some twisted part of her didn't crave exactly this. His obsession, his protection, his complete and utter focus. "I can't," she whispered. "Can't what?" "Tell you to stop." The smile that crossed his face was pure satisfaction, pure possession. "Good. Because I wasn't planning to listen anyway." He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, a claiming that left no room for doubt about his intentions. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, and his voice was rough. "You're mine, Ariana. Say it. This is crazy. Say it. I'm yours." The words felt like surrender and liberation all at once. "Forever," he amended, and the certainty in his voice made it feel like a vow. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of tension and longing. Raphael kept her close, teaching her his business, introducing her to his world while shielding her from its darkest corners. He was patient in ways that contradicted everything she knew about him, content to steal kisses in empty hallways, to hold her hand beneath his desk during meetings, to have her near without demanding more than she was ready to give. But the hunger in his eyes grew daily, and Ariana felt her own resistance crumbling under the weight of his devotion. He sent flowers to her mother's hospital room. He had her apartment's broken heating fixed without being asked. He remembered she liked her coffee with 2 sugars and made sure it was waiting for her every morning. Small things that added up to something overwhelming. Ariana was falling, and there was no safety net except the man whose world was built on quicksand. Then came the night everything shifted. They were working late, reviewing contracts for a shipping acquisition, when Raphael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire demeanor changed, tension flooding his shoulders, jaw tightening. "What's wrong?" "Matteo Vitali is making moves against my operations. He's been quiet since the gala, but he's coordinating with the Calabrese family to challenge my territory." Raphael's voice was cold, controlled fury. "He's trying to start a war. What will you do?" He looked at her, and she saw the monster everyone else feared lurking behind his eyes. "What I always do. Remove the threat." "Raphael, this is my world, Ariana. This is who I am." He stood, buttoning his jacket with mechanical precision. "I need you to go home. Marco will drive you. Don't leave your apartment until you hear from me. How long? However long it takes. He cupped her face, and the gentleness contradicted the violence in his eyes. I need to know you're safe while I handle this. Can you do that for me? Ariana nodded, fear clawing at her throat. Not fear of him, but fear for him. Fear of what he was walking into, fear of losing something she'd just found. He kissed her forehead, a benediction and a promise. I'll come back to you. I always will. Then he was gone, and Ariana was left alone in his study, surrounded by the empire he'd built, terrified of what the night would bring. She went home as ordered, but sleep was impossible. She paced her apartment, phone clutched in her hand, jumping at every sound. Hours passed. Dawn broke. Still nothing. When her phone finally rang, it wasn't Raphael. It was Luca. He's alive, was the first thing he said, and Ariana's knees nearly buckled with relief. But he needs you. I'm sending a car. She didn't ask questions, just threw on clothes and waited, heart in her throat. The car took her not to the estate, but to a private medical facility she didn't recognize. Luca met her at the entrance, his expression grim. What happened? Matteo tried to ambush him. Raphael handled it, but he took a bullet in the shoulder. He's stable, refusing treatment until he sees you. Ariana ran. She found Raphael in a private room, blood staining his torn shirt, a doctor hovering nervously nearby. His eyes locked on her the moment she entered, and some of the tension left his frame. Told you I'd come back, he said, voice rough with pain. Ariana crossed the room in 3 strides, her hands shaking as they hovered over him, afraid to touch, afraid to hurt him. You're bleeding. It's nothing. His good hand caught hers, bringing it to his chest. I needed to see you. Needed to know you were safe. I'm fine. You're the one who got shot. She turned to the doctor. Help him. Please. The doctor moved in, and Raphael's grip tightened on her hand. Stay. So she stayed, holding his hand while they cleaned the wound, extracted the bullet, stitched him back together. He never made a sound, never flinched, his eyes locked on hers the entire time like she was the only thing keeping him grounded. When it was done and they were alone, Ariana finally let herself break. The tears came hot and fast, terror and relief tangling together. Hey! Raphael pulled her down onto the bed beside him, ignoring the doctor's orders to stay still. I'm fine. I'm here. You could have died. But I didn't. His fingers threaded through her hair, tilting her face up. Because I had something to come back to. Someone. This is your life. Violence and bullets, and you. He cut her off, his voice fierce despite his weakness. You're my life now, Ariana. Everything else is just background noise. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was being ridiculous, but the words died when he kissed her. This kiss was different, desperate, claiming, a promise sealed in blood and determination. When they broke apart, Raphael's expression was serious. Matteo's dead. So are 3 of his associates. The Calabrese family will receive a message that anyone who comes after what's mine will meet the same fate. Ariana should have been horrified. Should have recoiled from the casual way he spoke of death. Instead, all she felt was a twisted sense of relief that the threat was gone. What's happening to me? She whispered. I should be running from you. But you're not. His thumb brushed away her tears. You're exactly where you belong. He was right, and that terrified her more than anything. Luca drove them back to the estate as sunrise painted the sky gold and crimson. Raphael refused to let go of her hand the entire drive, his thumb tracing circles on her palm like he needed the constant reassurance of her presence. At the estate, he was supposed to rest. The doctor had been explicit about that. Instead, Raphael pulled her into his private quarters, rooms she'd never entered before, and locked the door behind them. Raphael, you need to sleep. I need you. He backed her against the wall, his injured arm not slowing him down. I need to feel you, to know this is real, that you're here. Ariana's breath caught as his mouth found her neck, teeth grazing sensitive skin. You're hurt. I don't care. His hands were everywhere, sliding over her waist, her hips claiming and possessive. I almost died tonight, and all I could think about was that I hadn't made you mine yet. Really mine. I am yours. Not enough. He lifted her, carrying her toward the bed despite her protests about his injury. Not nearly enough. What followed was a slow burn of sensation, his hands learning every curve, his mouth mapping every gasp and sigh. He worshipped her with a devotion that made her feel precious, cherished, owned in the best possible way. When they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that contradicted the violence of his world, a joining that felt inevitable and earth-shattering all at once. Afterward, Ariana lay in his arms, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the rise and fall of his chest. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, and she'd never felt safer despite knowing she was in the bed of one of the most dangerous men in the country. "Marry me," Raphael said into the quiet. Ariana's breath stopped. "What? Marry me?" He shifted, looking down at her with absolute certainty. "I know it's fast. I know you probably think I'm insane. But I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You're it for me, Ariana. The only thing that matters. Raphael, we barely know each other. I know you take your coffee with 2 sugars. I know you call your mother every day at 2. I know you're terrified of thunderstorms, but you won't admit it. I know you bite your lip when you're concentrating, and you hum when you think no one's listening." His hand cupped her face. "I know you're the only person who's ever made me want to be better than what I am. What else do I need to know?" Ariana's heart was racing. This is crazy. Say yes anyway. She should say no. Should demand time, rationality, normalcy. But there was nothing normal about what they had, nothing rational about the way he looked at her, like she was the answer to every question he'd never thought to ask. "Yes," she whispered, and watched his face transform with a joy so pure it took her breath away. He kissed her then, sealing the promise, and Ariana knew she'd just changed the course of her entire life. The next morning, Raphael presented her with a ring, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds that must have cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. She stared at it, overwhelmed. "It was my grandmother's," he said quietly. "The only thing I have from before all of this. I want you to have it." Ariana slipped it on, and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. Raphael didn't leave things to chance. News of their engagement spread through the estate like wildfire. The staff looked at her differently now, with respect, with fear, with the understanding that she was no longer just a maid but the future wife of Don Raphael Santini. Her mother cried when Ariana told her, tears of joy and concern tangled together. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart? He's not an ordinary man. I know exactly who he is, Mama." And somehow that made her love him more. The wedding was planned for 6 weeks out, a small private ceremony despite Raphael's prominence. He wanted it intimate, wanted it to be about them rather than the spectacle his world would demand. But before that could happen, Ariana started feeling ill. It began with morning nausea, waves of dizziness that had her gripping counters for support. She ignored it at first, chalking it up to stress and the whirlwind of wedding planning. But when it persisted for a week, she finally saw a doctor. The diagnosis made her world tilt, pregnant. 6 weeks along, which meant it had happened that night after Raphael was shot, when they'd come together with desperate need and no thought for consequences. Ariana sat in her car outside the doctor's office, hands shaking on the steering wheel, mind racing. She was going to have Raphael's baby. They weren't even married yet, barely knew each other despite the engagement, and she was carrying his child. Terror and joy warred in her chest. She drove to the estate in a daze, finding Raphael in his study reviewing shipment manifests. He looked up when she entered, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. "What's wrong? I need to tell you something." Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. Raphael stood, rounding the desk. "You're pale. Sit down. I'm pregnant." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Raphael went perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Seconds stretched into eternity while Ariana's heart hammered against her ribs. Then he moved, crossing the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms with a fierceness that stole her breath. "Say it again," he commanded, voice rough. "I'm pregnant. 6 weeks." He pulled back just enough to cup her face, and she saw it then, joy pure and unfiltered, blazing in his eyes. "You're having my baby." "Yes. You're mine forever now." His smile was devastating. "You know that, right? There's no escape. You're bound to me completely." The words should have sounded possessive, threatening. Instead, they sounded like a vow, like salvation. "I don't want to escape," she admitted. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and when he pulled back, his hand immediately went to her stomach, covering the barely there swell with a reverence that made her throat tight. "Nothing will ever hurt you," he promised. "You or our child. I swear it on my life." Ariana believed him. The next weeks were a blur of wedding preparations and doctor's appointments. Raphael became even more protective, if that was possible, insisting on accompanying her everywhere, having food specially prepared to combat her nausea, rearranging his entire schedule around her needs. It was overwhelming and suffocating and absolutely perfect. The wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in the estate's garden, surrounded by flowers and a handful of trusted people. Ariana wore a simple white dress that accommodated her changing body, and Raphael looked at her like she was the only thing in existence. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady, absolute. I promise to protect you, to worship you, to give you everything I am and everything I have. You're my salvation, Ariana. My redemption. I'm yours until my last breath. Ariana's vows were simpler, but no less true. I choose you. Every day, in every way. I'm yours. They sealed it with a kiss, and Ariana became Mrs. Santini, tied to this dangerous, beautiful, obsessed man for the rest of her life. The reception was small, intimate, and perfect. Raphael never left her side, his hand always touching her waist, her hand, the small of her back, like he needed the constant physical reminder that she was real, that she was his. That night, in their bedroom, he undressed her with reverent slowness, his hands mapping the subtle changes in her body, the slight rounding of her stomach where their child grew. You've never been more beautiful, he murmured against her skin. I'm barely showing. You're carrying our child. Our future. His eyes met hers, blazing with emotion. You're everything. They came together slowly, carefully, Raphael mindful of her condition, but no less possessive in his claiming. And afterward, as they lay tangled together, his hand splayed protectively over her stomach, Ariana felt a peace she'd never known. This was happiness. This was home. But peace, she would learn, was a fragile thing in Raphael's world. 3 months into her pregnancy, Ariana woke to find Raphael's side of the bed empty. This wasn't unusual. He often worked late or early, managing the empire that funded their lives. But something felt wrong, a prickling at the base of her skull that made her uneasy. She found him in his study, papers scattered across his desk, his expression carved from stone. What's wrong? Stefano Calabrese. The name was spat like a curse. Matteo Vitali's cousin. He's been building alliances, preparing for retaliation. And he knows about you. Ariana's hand went instinctively to her stomach. What does that mean? It means you're a target. Raphael's jaw was tight. It means he knows the fastest way to destroy me is through you and our baby. Fear, cold and sharp, sliced through her. What do we do? I'm handling it. But his eyes told a different story. This was a threat he couldn't simply eliminate with violence. Stefano was smart, connected, patient. I'm increasing security. You don't go anywhere without guards. And I want you to consider staying at the safe house until this is resolved. Absolutely not. Ariana crossed her arms. I'm not leaving you. Ariana. No. Her voice was firm despite her fear. We're married. We're having a baby. I'm not running away the first time things get dangerous. I knew who you were when I said yes. Something flickered in Raphael's eyes, pride maybe or love so deep it hurt. You're the strongest person I know. I'm terrified. Good. Fear keeps you careful. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt the tension thrumming through him. I won't let anything happen to you. I'd burn the world down first. She believed him. That was the problem. Over the next weeks, Raphael's security measures became suffocating. Guards followed her everywhere. The estate was locked down. Raphael himself barely slept, dividing his time between hunting Stefano and ensuring her safety. Ariana watched him deteriorate, the shadows under his eyes deepening, his temper shortening, the careful control he prided himself on fraying at the edges. He was trying to fight a war on multiple fronts, and it was destroying him. One night, she found him in his study at 3 a.m, staring at photographs of Stefano Calabrese with an expression that chilled her blood. Come to bed, she said softly. I can't. His voice was rough. Not until I know you're safe. I am safe. You've made sure of that. It's not enough. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. It will never be enough. Not while he's out there, planning, waiting for a chance to hurt you. Ariana crossed to him, taking his face in her hands. You can't protect me from everything. Watch me try. His arms came around her, pulling her close. You and this baby are everything to me, Ariana. If something happened to you, it won't. She kissed him, trying to pour certainty into the contact. We're going to be fine. But even as she said it, she wondered if she was lying to them both. The breaking point came a week later. Ariana was at a doctor's appointment, surrounded by guards, when shots rang out. The world exploded into chaos, screaming, shattering glass, the acrid smell of gunpowder. Her guards formed a wall around her, returning fire, shouting into radios. Someone grabbed her arm, pulling her toward an exit. She ran, heart hammering, one hand protecting her swollen belly, terror making her clumsy. They got her into an armored car, speeding away from the clinic as sirens wailed in the distance. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, the reality of how close she'd come to death sinking in like ice water in her veins. Raphael met them at the estate, his face a mask of controlled fury. He pulled her from the car, hands running over her frantically, checking for injuries. "I'm okay," she gasped. "The baby's okay. Stefano just signed his death warrant." Raphael's voice was deadly calm. "This ends tonight. Raphael, please." "No." He cupped her face, and she saw the monster lurking behind his eyes, the man who'd built an empire on violence. "He came after you. After our child. There's no mercy for that. No negotiation. Only blood." He kissed her forehead, a benediction and an apology. "Stay here. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me or Luca." Then he was gone, taking half his men with him, leaving Ariana alone in their fortress with only fear for company. Hours passed. Ariana paced the bedroom, unable to sit still, unable to think beyond the terror that Raphael wouldn't come back, that she'd lose him to the violence that defined his world. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "He's walking into a trap." Stefano knew he'd come. "If you ever want to see your husband again, come to the warehouse on 5th and Main. Alone. You have 1 hour." Ariana's blood turned to ice. It was obvious bait, an obvious trap. Raphael would tell her to stay put, to let him handle it. But Raphael might die walking into Stefano's ambush, and she couldn't live with that. She made her decision in seconds. Slipping past the guards was easier than it should have been. They were focused on external threats, not on her leaving. She took one of the estate's cars, driving through the night toward the warehouse district with her heart in her throat. The warehouse was exactly what she expected, dark, abandoned, perfect for an ambush. She parked outside, hands trembling on the steering wheel. This was insane. This was suicide. But Raphael had risked everything for her, and she couldn't do any less. She stepped into the warehouse and immediately felt the gun barrel against her temple. "Mrs. Santini." Stefano Calabrese's voice was smooth, cultured. "How obliging of you to join us. Let Raphael go." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "This is between you and me. It's between me and him. You're just leverage." He grabbed her arm, dragging her deeper into the warehouse. "He killed my cousin. Now I'll take everything he loves and make him watch it die." Ariana's hand went protectively to her stomach. "Please." Begging. "How delicious." He pulled out his phone, dialing. "Don Raphael? I have something of yours. The warehouse on 5th and Main. Come alone, or I start cutting pieces off your pretty wife." He hung up, smiling. Now we wait. Ariana didn't have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes later, the warehouse doors burst open, and Raphael stood there, backlit by streetlights, looking like vengeance incarnated. "Let her go, Stefano." "Not a chance." The gun pressed harder against Ariana's head. "You took everything from me. Now I return the favor. I'll give you anything." Raphael's voice was raw, desperate in a way she'd never heard. "Money, territory, my entire empire. Just let her walk away. Your empire means nothing if you're dead to enjoy it." Stefano's finger tightened on the trigger. Everything happened at once. Raphael moved, impossibly fast despite the distance. A shot rang out. Ariana felt the gun leave her temple. She hit the ground, rolled, looked up to see Raphael and Stefano grappling, blood blooming on someone's shirt. More shots. Luca and Raphael's men pouring through the doors. The sharp crack of bones breaking. Stefano's scream cut short. Then silence. Raphael was beside her, pulling her up, hands running over her frantically. "Are you hurt? The baby?" "I'm fine. We're fine." She was sobbing now, terror and relief tangling together. "You came. I'll always come for you." He pulled her against his chest, and she felt him shaking. "You stupid, brave, insane woman. You could have died. So could you." She pulled back, seeing the blood on his shirt. "You're hurt. It's not mine." His expression was grim. "Stefano's dead. So are his men. The threat is over." Ariana looked past him to where bodies littered the warehouse floor, and she should have felt horror, should have felt revulsion. Instead, she just felt grateful that Raphael was alive, that their baby was safe, that the nightmare was finally over. "Take me home," she whispered. He did, cradling her in the back of the car like she was made of glass, his hand never leaving her stomach where their child grew. At the estate, the doctor confirmed what Ariana already knew. She and the baby were fine, shaken but unharmed. Raphael didn't leave her side the entire examination, his jaw tight, his eyes haunted. When they were finally alone, he pulled her into his arms and broke. She felt it in the way he held her, too tight, like he was afraid she'd disappear. Felt it in the tremor that ran through his powerful frame. "I almost lost you," he said roughly. "Both of you. But you didn't." Ariana's hands found his face, forcing him to look at her. "We're here. We're safe. Because of you. You shouldn't have come. You should have stayed here where it was safe. You would have walked into a trap. Better me than you. Not to me." She kissed him, pouring every ounce of love and certainty into the contact. "Never to me. We're in this together, Raphael. For better or worse. That's what I promised when I married you." His arms tightened around her. "I love you. God, I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too." The words felt like freedom. Even when you're being an overprotective, obsessive, dangerous man. "Especially then," he corrected, and his smile was pure possession. The next months were peaceful in a way Ariana had never expected. With Stefano dead and his allies scattered, the immediate threats to Raphael's empire dissipated. He consolidated power, made strategic alliances, and slowly transformed from a man fighting constant wars to a man building a legacy for his child. Ariana's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Raphael was attentive to the point of absurdity, tracking every milestone, attending every appointment, reading every book on parenting he could find. Watching him transform from feared mafia boss to anxious father-to-be was the most endearing thing Ariana had ever witnessed. Her mother recovered fully from her cancer. The treatments Raphael had arranged working miracles. She moved into a guest house on the estate, and Ariana loved having her close, loved seeing Raphael charm her mother with a gentleness few people knew he possessed. When Ariana went into labor on a rainy Tuesday evening, Raphael nearly lost his mind. He held her hand through every contraction, looking more terrified than she'd ever seen him, even when facing down armed enemies. "You're doing amazing," he kept saying, and she wanted to laugh at how his voice shook. "This is your fault," she gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. "I know. I'm sorry. I love you. Please don't die." "I'm not dying, you idiot. I'm having a baby." But when their daughter finally arrived, tiny and perfect, and screaming her displeasure at the world, Raphael looked at Ariana like she'd performed a miracle. "She's beautiful," he whispered, tears streaming down his face as he held their daughter for the first time. "She's perfect. You're perfect." They named her Isabella, and from the moment Raphael held her, Ariana knew their daughter would be the most protected, most loved child in existence. Watching Raphael with Isabella was a revelation. This dangerous man, this feared crime lord, completely melted in the presence of his daughter. He changed diapers and sang lullabies and paced the floor at 3 a.m, and Ariana fell in love with him all over again. One night, when Isabella was 3 months old, Ariana found Raphael in the nursery, holding their sleeping daughter, staring down at her with an expression of pure wonder. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That I'd burn the entire world down to keep her safe. To keep you both safe." He looked up, and his eyes were bright. "Before you, I built an empire on fear. Now I have something worth building a better world for. You're going to be a wonderful father. I'm going to try." He stood carefully, placing Isabella in her crib with practiced ease. "I'm also going to make sure she grows up knowing she's loved unconditionally. That she has a choice in who she becomes. That she's not trapped by my legacy." Ariana stepped into his embrace, fitting perfectly against him. "She's going to be extraordinary. Just like her father. Like her mother," he corrected, kissing her temple. "Strong, brave, impossibly stubborn. I got you pregnant on purpose, you know," he murmured into her hair. Ariana pulled back, eyes wide. "What?" His smile was unapologetic. "That night after I was shot. I could have been careful. I chose not to be. Raphael, I wanted to bind you to me completely. I wanted to make sure you could never leave. I wanted a piece of us, a forever commitment." His hand cupped her face. "I'm not sorry. I'd do it again in a heartbeat." She should be angry. Should feel manipulated. Instead, she just laughed because of course he had. Of course her obsessive, possessive husband had orchestrated even this. "You're insane. I'm yours." He kissed her deep and thorough. "Forever. Completely. Irrevocably yours." "Lucky me," she whispered against his lips. No. His arms tightened around her. Lucky me. The luckiest man in the world. Later, as they lay in bed with Isabella sleeping peacefully in the next room, Ariana thought about the journey that had brought them here. From maid to wife to mother, from stranger to soulmate, from fear to love. Raphael had been right that first day. She'd been his from the moment she walked into his estate. Not because he'd claimed her, but because some part of her had recognized him, had known that this dangerous, beautiful, obsessed man was hers to love, hers to save, hers to build a life with. What are you thinking? Raphael asked, fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. That I don't regret anything. Not one single moment. Good. He pulled her closer, his body curving protectively around hers. Because I'm never letting you go. You're mine, Ariana Santini. You and Isabella, and any other children we have. Mine to love, mine to protect, mine to worship for the rest of my life. Forever, she agreed. Forever, he promised. And in the darkness of their bedroom, surrounded by the empire he'd built and the family they'd created, Ariana believed him. Because Raphael Santini was a man of his word, and he'd promised her forever. She'd hold him to it. Years later, when Isabella was 5 and her brother Marco was 2, Ariana would stand in the garden of the estate, watching Raphael teach their daughter to dance while Marco toddled around their feet, and she'd remember that terrified girl who'd taken a job as a maid just to pay her mother's medical bills. She'd remember the moment she'd looked up to find a dangerous man watching her like she was salvation. She'd remember being claimed, protected, loved with an intensity that should have frightened her, but instead made her feel invincible. Raphael would catch her eye across the garden, and his smile would be pure possession, pure love, pure certainty. And she'd smile back, because she was his and he was hers, and nothing in the world could change that. Not danger, not fear, not the violence of his world or the impossibility of their beginning. They'd chosen each other, and that choice had become a forever commitment, sealed in blood and love and the children who carried both their legacies. Ariana wouldn't change a single thing. Not the fear, not the danger, not the insanity of falling for a mafia boss who'd decided she was his before she'd even known his name. Because love, real love, wasn't about safety or sanity or making sense. It was about finding the person who saw you completely and loved you anyway. It was about choosing each other, every day despite everything. It was about building something permanent in a world of chaos. And she and Raphael had done exactly that. Forever. Just like he'd promised. Just like she'd always known they would.